came to life with magic. Every member of our family was given their own gift.
Why am I the only one that didn't get a gift?
You're just as special as anyone.
You just healed my hand with an arepa con queso.
The fate of the family, it's gonna come down to you.
I will save the magic.
Encanto. Stream sekarang di Disney Plus Hotstar. Pelanggan pack movies, aktifkan sekarang di astro.com.my/Disney.
Good evening, you're tuning in to AWANI Tonight with me, Farhana Sheikh. Johor sets polling day for March 12th, nomination day on February 26th. We discuss Undi 18, campaigning, voters turnout and more. Stay tuned. The Election Commission has set polling day for the Johor state election on March 12th, while nomination day on February 26th. EC Chairman Dato' Abdul Ghani Saleh said that the 14-day campaign would start on February 26 after nomination till 11:59 p.m. on March 11th. He said the EC will station 56 election officers, aided by 186 assistant managers to monitor the campaign activities. Meanwhile, he added that early polling will be held on March 8. A total of 2.597 million voters are eligible to cast their ballots in the state election. 2 out of Pakatan Harapan's 3 component parties have agreed to make way for Muda to contest in 6 seats in the upcoming Johor elections. In a joint statement, leaders from Muda, Amanah and DAP said the 3 parties came to the agreement in the interest of a larger political cooperation during and after the election. Also outlined in the statement is Muda's ongoing negotiations with the third PH component party, PKR, in order to prevent any overlapping of seats between the parties. According to the statement, the negotiations continue for the sake of unity among opposition parties in facing this state election. The 6 seats allocated to Muda are Tenang, Bukit Kepong, Parit Raja, Machap, Puteri Wangsa and Bukit Permai. This is also the first time that 18-year-old voters will be able to cast their ballots after the Undi 18 bills were gazetted last year. Malaysians living abroad in 4 neighbouring countries are now eligible for postal voting for the upcoming Johor polls. According to the EC, these individuals can apply from today until February 18th to cast their ballots. We speak to Undi 18 co-founder Kira Yusri on simplifying the voting process for all Malaysians.
Idea is that how do we, make the process easier for first-time voters. Already they're probably facing a tough choice of like choosing their leaders. Let's make the process, the democratic process, easier and accessible for them. We're also hoping to engage with Malaysians abroad, especially to highlight the importance of postal voting, because this will be, so usually, if you don't know, usually Malaysians in Singapore do not qualify for postal voting, but ever since COVID, they now do have they are now able to do postal voting. So the risk is that many Malaysians may not know about it because they have to register to become a postal voter. You don't just, the embassy don't automatically know you're there. The EC doesn't automatically know you live abroad. So they have to register themselves and, provide EC enough time to get the ballots to them, for them to mark their votes and then mail the ballots back to Malaysia and making sure that it arrives the same day as we all vote.
Kira urged Malaysians residing in Singapore, Thailand, Brunei and Kalimantan in Indonesia to register for postal voting at www.myspr.spr.gov.my.
It's actually not very hard, to be honest. This process is not very hard. You need to go to SPR's website, mySPR, I think it's myspr.spr.gov. But if you just look up SPR's website, you'll be able to download the forms needed to submit. So depending what category of voters you are, there'll be specific instruction on the website. It's very simple. You just need to inform SPR. Essentially, it's a way to inform them that you live abroad update them with your most current address, so they'll be able, and also inform them which constituency you're voting in, so that they can process and send out the ballots, especially after nomination day, because I think this time we only have 2 weeks of campaigning. So within that 2 weeks, the ballot has to be printed, mailed to you, and you have to vote and mail it back to Malaysia.
With an increase in COVID-19 cases due to the Omicron variant, there is no denying the fact that a bulk of political campaigning will be done digitally. How efficient will digital campaigning through social media be this time around in Johor? We speak to political analyst at UKM, Professor Dr. Kartini Khalid, for her insights.
Utilization of social media will be the best to introduce candidates, especially if they decided to introduce more than 80% new faces, new candidates to vote. That's the best way to reach out the people, the voters. But if the EC would allow kind of a limited campaign with a special tent with SOP, strict SOP, people can gather in a tent with strict SOP to listen and get to know the candidates, that would be good. But knowing that the current in cases is now increasing up to more than 13,000, I'm sure that the best way to introduce candidate and to campaign and the manifesto will be through social media.
The EC has targeted a 70% voter turnout in the upcoming state election. Can this be achieved? We asked political analyst Professor Dr. Kartini Khalid on how can the voters be encouraged to vote this March.
Well, we can always look at the incentive and initiative, and both incentive and initiative would be ways to increase voters turnout. Incentive means giving cash allowance for voters outside Johor to come back and vote. The initiative could be providing free transportation for voters in rural and semi-urban, driving them to the poll centers. And I think NGO can play a good role here in terms of increasing political participation among voters by sponsoring a van, a taxi, or perhaps Grab for voters to go out and vote during the election day. I think the incentive and the initiative would be a practical way to motivate and increase voters turnout.
Will the Johor state elections be an incubator for the emergence of new political players and alliances? Tonight on Consider This, we ask our guests about the political dynamics in the state. There is no proof of bribery among politicians who jump ship. This is according to the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission (MACC) Chief Commissioner Tan Sri Azam Baki, after receiving several reports that money was involved in party hopping cases. Azam pointed out that party hopping is not wrong, as there are no laws preventing politicians from doing so. He also supported calls to enact a political funding act, as existing election laws make it hard to differentiate between legal and illegal funds. De facto Law Minister Datuk Sri Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar earlier said that the tabling of an anti-party hopping bill is expected in the next Dewan Rakyat session, much earlier than the initial July timeline given. More in a few minutes, stay tuned.
Banyak kuman berbahaya di luar. Jangan pegang. Jangan pegang.
Kita perlukan penyelesaian 24 jam Lifebuoy Silver Shield formula ini melawan kuman berbahaya.
Rangkaian memang menakjubkan. Ia hubungkan kita, corakkan insan untuk kita gagah mara. Malah sedia menggendong aspirasi kita. Tak kira siapa, di mana kita berada atau cita-cita. Kita mungkin dari rangkaian berbeza. Bersama, kita kuasakan rangkaian Malaysia. yang sentiasa sedia melakar masa depan.
Welcome back. Sweden is the latest country in Europe to lift its last remaining COVID restrictions, joining Denmark and Norway. This means no more vaccine certificates and limits on public gatherings, while restrictions of operating hours for restaurants and bars have also been lifted. Yet the streets of Stockholm on Wednesday were quiet and there wasn't any partying, for now. For most of the pandemic, Sweden stood out among European nations for its comparatively hands-off response. It never went into lockdown, largely relying instead on individual responsibility to control infections. While COVID deaths were high compared with other Nordic countries, they were lower than many other places in Europe that did implement lockdowns. Announcing the reopening last week, Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson said that the pandemic is not over, but has entered a new phase, and while infection rates have risen, it is not overly burdening hospitals. Last week, Denmark became the first EU country to lift almost all COVID restrictions. It was quickly followed by Norway. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has urged rich countries to pay their fair share of funds needed for its plan to overcome COVID-19. This amounts to $16 billion to be paid as soon as possible. WHO said the rapid cash injection could help finish off COVID-19 as a global health emergency by this year. The money will be channeled to the organization's Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, which helps produce and distribute vaccines, tests, treatments, and personal protective equipment to tackle the pandemic. WHO said that just 0.4% of the 4.7 billion COVID tests administered globally have been used in low-income countries. Meanwhile, only 10% of people in those nations have received at least one vaccine dose. The organization lamented yesterday that 500,000 COVID-19 deaths had been recorded since the Omicron variant was declared a variant of concern in late November. It has since rapidly overtaken Delta as the world's dominant COVID variant due to its high transmissibility, with currently 130 million cases worldwide. The South Korean parliament discussed possible ways for citizens infected with COVID-19 to vote in the general elections next month. This as the country battles a surge in infections triggered by Omicron, with nearly 50,000 new cases reported a day. South Korea will elect its next president on March 9th. While both ruling and opposition parties called for allowing COVID-positive patients to vote in person from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., an amendment to the Public Official Election Act is needed to do so. A proposal was expected to be put up for a vote on Monday. The government also called for mail-in voting for positive cases, while the main opposition party suggested setting up special polling stations. Currently, those infected by COVID aren't allowed to vote due to isolation requirements. Over in Afghanistan, all but 5 of 38 COVID-19 hospitals that once operated in the country have been forced to close due to a lack of doctors, medicines, and even heating. This comes as the country experienced a 67% increase in the numbers of reported COVID cases last week. At Kabul's single COVID-19 treatment hospital, there's only enough fuel to heat the building at night, even as winter temperatures drop below freezing during the day. Its director, Dr. Muhammad Guliwal, said they need everything from oxygen to medical supplies as hospital beds fill up with COVID patients. And since the Taliban takeover almost 6 months ago, hospital staff have received only 1 month's salary, but many still show up to work.
We faced with difficult situation like lack of oxygen, medicine, and other medical supplies. Even our staff did not take the 3 months' salaries.
Afghanistan's healthcare system has collapsed since the Taliban returned to power in August.
Its healthcare had survived for nearly 2 decades almost entirely on international donor funding, and that has now stopped. While the Taliban are also trying to get more people vaccinated, many are skeptical and view the Taliban as dangerous. Currently, barely 27% of Afghanistan's 38 million population have been vaccinated, most with the single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
That is all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Get the latest news updates on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and the Astro Awani app. I am Farhana Sheikh. We'll see you again.